Today, I want to talk about the comfort zone. Comfort, a very important part of language learning that is often not talked about. Now, we do say to improve or to even be interested in another language, we have to be prepared to get outside our comfort zone. I think I have said that before, but I'm having second thoughts. I've also said that the definition of fluency, my definition of fluency is when I feel comfortable and when the person listening to me feels comfortable hearing me speak that language or engaging with me in that language. So being comfortable is a big part of successful language learning. In fact, we don't get outside of our comfort zone. We move our comfort zone so that we're always comfortable. And in that regard, I decided to have a look at the book that I wrote back in 2003 about language learning. One of the key concepts in what I wrote back in 2003, so that's 23 years ago, is that a person's mindset is key. Are you willing to accept imperfection? Are you willing to be comfortable with imperfection? Are you curious about other cultures? Are you willing to project yourself into that other culture and engage with people of a different culture and language? That doesn't necessarily mean being uncomfortable. In fact, you want to be comfortable being with these people of a different language and culture. In a way, my book predated at least my knowledge of Krashen and his more scholarly research on how we learn languages. I already understood that it was an organic, natural process of getting used to another language through massive input. And part of that is to create our own language world. And I use those terms in my book. And I made reference to Lao Tzu, symbolically, who 2,500 years ago said we can know the world by looking out or without looking outside our window. And I made reference to Machiavelli and to Montaigne, who both had difficult circumstances. Machiavelli worked in the mud in his farm, and Montaigne, at a time when there were, civil war in France, both of them would retreat to the comfort of their library and connect with, authors of classical Greece and so forth and so on. In other words, they created their own world, a world of language, a world of thought. They had a comfort zone. Language learning and connecting with different languages has been that way for me in many ways. I even thought of it in terms of like a snail. A snail always lives inside its shell, its house, but it reaches out to forage for food. It reaches out to find its way. And similarly, we have our shell, things that are comfortable to us, and yet we can go out and explore gradually. But we always keep our shell, our comfort area with us, hopefully, and therefore we remain comfortable even as we explore. Now, how does all of this theoretical stuff apply to the actual practice of language learning? The first thing is compelling input. If you are going to engage with language, it has to be comfortable. It has to be interesting. To some extent, the material that you listen to and read has to be familiar. You'll understand it better. You'll connect with it better if it's somewhat familiar. The voice should be pleasant if you're listening. Everything you can do to make the engagement with content, whether reading or listening, more comfortable, that's going to help you along the way. When you feel that you're not comfortable, you should try to find other content that might make you feel more comfortable or more at ease. So even when reading, initially if there are a lot of words that you don't understand, then it's uncomfortable to read printed book, and that's, as I've said before, more or less at the origin of link. However, when you have enough vocabulary, when you have developed yourself, moved yourself forward, or you know enough words because you have been reading online and looking up words and increasing your familiarity with the language, then it's more comfortable, at least I find it more comfortable to read a printed book, holding on to the paper book. But I need to have a certain level of vocabulary for that to be a comfortable experience. Always I pursue comfort. Similarly, comfort is a major part of my strategy when it comes to vocabulary. I'm far more interested in passive vocabulary than I am focused on the active vocabulary, the vocabulary that I can retrieve while speaking. And evidently, everyone obviously has a much larger passive vocabulary. But that passive vocabulary is absolutely essential if we're to engage with people in meaningful conversations, because particularly native speakers will have a much larger vocabulary. They will use words that we may not use or may not be able to retrieve, but if we have that large passive vocabulary, we can then understand them and engage with them, even if the range of words that we use is more limited. And of course, this is quite relevant when it comes to speaking. I have always been reluctant to start speaking until I have enough passive vocabulary. I feel uncomfortable if I don't understand what the person is saying, and if I have almost no vocabulary that I can retrieve. Once I'm at a certain level in the language, I am more comfortable speaking with someone, occasionally struggling to understand, struggling to retrieve words, but at least we have a meaningful, authentic conversation. And I think this is another important part of speaking the language. There has to be this sense of conviviality, of a genuine engagement with someone else. That's where role-playing in an artificial environment is less satisfying than actually having a meaningful conversation with people within the range of the vocabulary that one is able to use or even understand. So even when it comes to writing, I have never had a great need to write in the languages that I have learned other than in French and Chinese. So I don't force myself to write, but people who do need to write, they'll do those things that they're comfortable doing. So some people are comfortable keeping a diary. Some very good polyglots like to translate in both directions. I do sort of a form of assisted writing in the sentence mode at Link, where I have to reassemble sentences. I'll often use Google Translate to write in a foreign language so that I don't make spelling mistakes or miss out on diacritics or accent marks. So I'll basically write what I want to write in English, and up comes the target language. I know enough of the target language to know if it's not quite what I wanted to say. So I use these assists because that's more comfortable to me. Obviously, if I were writing an exam in this target language, that would not be the end of it. I would have to practice writing in the target language, producing the language by myself. But whatever the circumstance, I always pursue those activities that are most comfortable to me. But there are times when we have to push ourselves. And here again, as I said in the previous video, it's not a matter of pressure to perform. It's rather making sure that we stay active. So concentrating our efforts so that, for example, the other day I was listening to 2.5 hours of Persian while cleaning the house. And I was alternating between the mini stories and then a difficult podcast about the war in Iran. But this concentrated exposure, there's a certain degree of intensity which is very important. You can do half an hour here, half an hour there, but at some point you have to commit yourself to 2 hours, 3 hours. A more concentrated period of exposure to the language. And if the need is to write, then you'll have to write for that period of time. So it all depends what your needs are. But at some point, I don't think it's to contradict the need for doing things that are comfortable, but a certain level of intensity is necessary. And that's why we have our statistics at Link, which track the level of activity. And it's often useful to be pushed to maintain a streak or things of this nature. I don't think it makes us uncomfortable, but it gives us an impetus to maintain a sufficient level of intensity in order to achieve results. And this moves sort of the range of our comfort level so that we can be comfortable in more and more difficult situations. So I just thought I'd talk a bit about this idea of comfort. We needn't think of language learning as something that's going to make us feel uncomfortable. We should be striving to feel comfortable in an environment where we are speaking another language. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.